Tonight we travel to sun-drenched hills where ancient olive trees twist their silver-green branches toward an endless blue sky, where the air smells of thyme and wild rosemary, and where the earth holds secrets that have slept since before Rome was young. In these Mediterranean highlands, beneath groves that have grown for 1,000 years, there exists a city that the world forgot, a place of marble and mystery, of fountains that still flow with clear water and of wisdom carved in stone. Our story begins in a village called Castellina, perched on a hilltop like a crown, where a girl named Sophia lived with her aunt in a house built from honey-coloured stone and generations of memory. If stories like this one fill your evenings with wonder, subscribe to travel with us each night. More magical journeys await, each one different, each one ready to carry you gently towards sleep. Dream well, dear listener. Sophia was 12 years old, with olive skin that tanned deep brown in the summer sun, dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, and eyes the colour of aged amber, warm and golden and flecked with light. She was tall for her age and strong, used to helping in her aunt's olive groves, used to climbing trees and carrying heavy baskets, and working in the fierce heat of Italian summer. Her hands were calloused from labour, but she didn't mind. She liked the feel of work well done, like the satisfaction of a full harvest basket or a tree properly pruned. She lived with her Aunt Elena in a house on the edge of Castellina, where the village streets gave way to terraced hillsides planted with row upon row of ancient olive trees. The house was built from the same honey-coloured stone as the rest of the village, its walls thick enough to keep out summer heat and winter cold, its roof tiled with terracotta that had weathered to shades of orange and pink and brown. Flowering vines climbed its southern wall, jasmine and bougainvillea, creating cascades of white and fuchsia that perfumed the air and drew butterflies by the hundreds. Inside, the house was cool and dim, with high ceilings crossed by dark wooden beams and floors of smooth stone worn to a shine by generations of footsteps. The rooms were simply furnished but comfortable. Heavy wooden furniture that had belonged to Sophia's great-grandparents, chairs with woven rush seats, a large table in the kitchen where meals were prepared and eaten, and where life happened. The walls were whitewashed and hung with old photographs in simple frames, ancestors Sophia had never known, staring solemnly at the camera in their Sunday best, their faces serious, but their eyes kind. The kitchen was the heart of the house, as kitchens often are in Italy. It had a large fireplace where, in winter, a wood fire burned all day, warming the whole house and providing heat for cooking. In summer, Aunt Elena cooked on a gas stove, but she still used the fireplace for roasting peppers or grilling bread, claiming nothing tasted as good as food cooked over wood. The kitchen always smelled wonderful, of garlic and tomatoes, of baking bread and simmering sauce, of olive oil and fresh herbs, of coffee brewing strong and dark in the little mocha pot that sat on the stove every morning. Aunt Alina was Sophia's mother's older sister. Though she looked younger than her 50-some years, she was small and wiry, all energy and motion, with the same dark hair as Sophia, though hers was streaked with silver that she made no effort to hide. She wore it pulled back in a practical bun when she worked, but in the evenings she'd let it down and it would fall past her shoulders in still thick waves. Her face was lined from years of sun and laughter, her hands rough from work, but her smile was bright and her laugh infectious. She had never married, had dedicated her life instead to the family olive groves that had been passed down through generations, that represented not just income but identity, heritage, connection to the land and the past. She knew every tree in the groves, could tell you which ones were the oldest, which produced the most fruit, which needed special care. She knew the land like she knew her own hands, knew where water collected after rain, where the soil was richest, where wild asparagus grew in spring and mushrooms in autumn. Sophia's parents had died when she was 7, a car accident on a rain-slick road, sudden and senseless and final. After that, Aunt Alina had taken Sophia in without hesitation, had raised her as her own, had taught her everything she knew about olives and oil, about the land and the seasons, about the hard work and simple joys of agricultural life. They had become their own small family, the two of them, finding completeness in each other and in the rhythm of their days. Every morning Sophia would wake to sunlight streaming through her window, warm and golden, painting patterns across her bed. Her room was small, but she loved it. It had belonged to her mother when she was a girl, and somehow Sophia felt close to her there, as if the walls held memories of her mother's childhood that Sophia could almost touch. The walls were still painted the pale blue her mother had chosen at 15. The wooden wardrobe still held a few of her mother's old things, a scarf, some books, a box of ribbons and old photographs. Sophia would lie there for a moment, listening to the sounds of morning, roosters crowing in the village below, church bells ringing the hour, the distant bleat of goats being led to pasture. Then she would rise and dress in comfortable work clothes, loose cotton pants and a light shirt, sturdy shoes, a wide-brimmed hat to keep off the sun. Downstairs, Aunt Elena would already be up, would have already been up for hours. Just to ret. She rose before dawn every day, said those quiet hours were the best for thinking, for planning, for simply being. By the time Sophia came down, there would be coffee made, strong and bitter and perfect, and fresh bread from the bakery in the village, and fruit from their own trees or the small garden behind the house. They would eat together on the terrace behind the house, a small paved area shaded by a grape arbour where clusters of green grapes hung heavy in late summer. The terrace overlooked the olive groves, row upon row of silvery green trees marching down the hillside, and beyond that, more hills rolling away into blue distance, dotted with other villages, other groves, other lives being lived in the ancient pattern of this land. As they ate, Aunt Elena would outline the day's work. In summer, there was always work. Trees to prune, undergrowth to clear, irrigation to manage in the driest weeks. In autumn, the harvest itself, when every hand in the village was busy picking olives and taking them to the press. In winter, maintenance and repair, fixing fences and clearing brush. In spring, watching for the tiny white flowers that would become next year's fruit, protecting young growth from late frosts. The work never ended, but it had its own rhythm, its own satisfaction. After breakfast, they would head to the groves. The walk was short, just down the terraced hillside behind the house, but Sophia never tired of it. The groves were beautiful in a stark, timeless way. The olive trees were ancient, some of them centuries old, their trunks thick and gnarled and twisted into fantastic shapes. Their bark was rough and furrowed, grey-brown and textured like the skin of elephants. Their branches spread wide, creating canopies of silver-green leaves that rustled in the slightest breeze with a sound like distant water. The ground between the trees was rocky, with thin soil that seemed impossible for anything to grow in, yet the olives thrived. They were tough trees, adapted to drought and poor soil, to the fierce summer sun and occasional winter frost. They asked little and gave much. Fruit for oil and eating, shade from the heat, beauty to the landscape and a connection to the past that ran deep as their roots. Sophia loved working in the groves. There was something meditative about it, something that quieted her mind and let her simply be. Whether she was pruning branches or clearing weeds or checking the irrigation lines, she could lose herself in the work, more in the rhythm of it, in the ancient partnership between human and tree that had sustained life in these hills for thousands of years. The village of Castellina was small, perhaps 300 people, all of whom knew each other and most of whom were related in some way or another. It clung to its hilltop like a fortress, which indeed it had been in medieval times, built for defence against raiders and wars that were now just stories. The houses were built close together, their walls shared, creating a tight cluster of honey-coloured stone around a central piazza where the church stood and where people gathered in the evenings. The streets were narrow and winding, following the contours of the hill, paved with smooth stones worn to a polish by centuries of footsteps. Some were barely wide enough for two people to pass. And no cars were allowed in the historic centre. You had to park below and walk up. Flowers spilled from window boxes and pots set on doorsteps. Laundry hung on lines strung between buildings, adding colour and life to the ancient stone. There was a church, naturally, the Chiesa di San Michele, built in the 12th century and rebuilt a dozen times since, its bell tower the highest point in the village. There was a small school that children attended through the 8th grade, after which they went to the regional school in the larger town down the valley. There was a post office that was open 3 days a week, a general store that sold everything from nails to pasta to rubber boots, and 2 bars where people gathered for coffee in the morning and wine in the evening. There was also, importantly, a bakery, Forno Rossi, Cest run by the same family for 5 generations, producing bread and pastries that people came from kilometres around to buy. The smell of baking bread would fill the streets every morning, and Sophia thought there was no better smell in the world than fresh bread mingling with the scent of coffee and the herbs that grew wild on the hillsides. The people of Castellina were farmers mostly, growing olives and grapes, keeping small gardens, raising chickens and sometimes goats. It was a hard life in some ways. The work was physical and never-ending, the income uncertain, dependent on weather and markets and 100 things beyond anyone's control. But it was also a good life, Sophia thought. A life connected to the earth and the seasons, to the food you ate and the oil you pressed, and to the long history of people who had done this same work in this same place for longer than anyone could remember. Other children in the village thought Sophia was lucky that she got to work in the groves instead of being stuck in school all summer, and in some ways she was lucky. She loved the work, loved the freedom of it, loved learning things that mattered in practical, tangible ways. But she also loved learning from books, loved history and languages and science, and she spent her evenings reading everything she could get her hands on. Aunt Elena encouraged this, would bring home books from the small library in the nearby town, would discuss what Sophia was reading over dinner, would challenge her to think deeply about ideas and questions. Eleanor herself had gone to university, unusual for a woman of her generation from a village like Castellina, had studied agricultural science before coming back to run the family groves, with knowledge both traditional and modern. She wanted Sophia to have choices, to go to university if she wanted, to see something of the world before deciding what life she wanted to live. In the evenings, after the work was done and they'd eaten their dinner, always simple, always fresh, always delicious, Sophia would often sit on the terrace with a book while Aunt Elena did mending or paperwork. The summer evenings were long, the sun setting late in a blaze of orange and pink that painted the hills in shades of gold. Swallows would dart through the air catching insects, their cries sharp and joyful. Bats would emerge as darkness fell, flitting silently between the trees. The air would cool slowly, bringing relief after the heat of the day, carrying the scents of jasmine and night-blooming flowers. Sometimes Aunt Elena would tell stories, family stories passed down through generations, stories about Sophia's grandparents and great-grandparents, about how the groves had been planted, about droughts and abundant harvests, about village festivals and family traditions. These stories connected Sophia to her past, made her feel part of something larger and older than herself. One evening in late summer, when the olives were beginning to ripen, and the harvest was only weeks away, when the air was thick and warm and heavy with the promise of autumn, Aunt Elena told a story Sophia had never heard before. They were sitting on the terrace as usual, the last light fading from the western sky, the first stars appearing overhead. Aunt Elena had been quiet all day, thoughtful, as if something was weighing on her mind. Finally, as she set down the ledger she'd been reviewing, she looked at Sophia with an expression that was part serious, part excited, and entirely mysterious. "Sophia," she said, "have you ever wondered what lies beneath the olive groves?" Sophia looked up from her book, puzzled. "You mean the soil? The rock underneath?" "No," Aunt Elena said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I mean the city." Sophia set down her book, her full attention on her aunt now. "What city?" Aunt Elena poured them both more wine, well watered for Sophia, and settled back in her chair. The evening light made her face look younger, softer, and her eyes held a faraway look, as if she were seeing something beyond the present moment. "When I was about your age," she began, "maybe a year or two older, I was helping my father, your grandfather, repair a collapsed stone wall at the edge of our oldest grove. This was the grove up on the highest terrace, where the oldest trees grow, the ones that were ancient even when your great-great-grandfather was young. As we were clearing away the fallen stones, we found something underneath, something that shouldn't have been there." She paused, and Sophia leaned forward, completely absorbed now. "It was a doorway," Eleanor continued. "Not a modern door, not anything that belonged to a farmhouse or a storage building. It was carved from a single piece of white marble, set into the living rock of the hillside, and on that door were words, carved in letters so old I couldn't read them, though I'd been studying Latin in school. The whole thing was covered with earth and roots. It must have been buried for centuries, maybe longer." "What did you do?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father told me to forget about it," Elena said. "He was a practical man, not given to fancies. He said it was probably just an old Roman tomb or wine cellar, nothing important, and we should leave it alone and get on with our work. So we repaired the wall, incorporated the marble door right into it actually, covered it up with stones, and we never spoke of it again." She paused, took a sip of her wine, her eyes distant. "But I never forgot it," she said softly. "I couldn't. Because there was something about that door, something that called to me. And sometimes, especially in dreams, I would see it again, see it opening, see light spilling out from whatever lay beyond it, and I would wake with the strangest feeling, as if I'd missed something important, as if I'd let an opportunity slip away that would never come again." Sophia's mind was racing. The door is still there, in the wall? If it hasn't crumbled away, yes, it should still be there, on the highest terrace, in the wall at the eastern edge. But Sophia, I'm telling you this now because... She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Because you've been having dreams too, haven't you? I've heard you talking in your sleep, heard you say words I don't recognize. And I've seen the way you look sometimes at the old grove, as if you're listening for something the rest of us can't hear. Sophia felt her cheeks flush. She'd been having dreams, strange vivid dreams of marble halls and flowing water, of libraries filled with scrolls, of starlight falling through open roofs onto gardens that grew in impossible profusion. In the dreams, someone was calling her name, a voice that was patient and kind and very, very old. She had thought they were just dreams, just her imagination working through the books she'd been reading about ancient Rome and Greece. But if Aunt Elena was having dreams too... "I have been dreaming," Sophia admitted, "about a city underground, about places filled with light even though they're buried deep, about someone waiting for a very long time. I thought I was just being silly." "Not silly," Elena said firmly. "The women in our family, we sometimes know things, see things, feel things that others don't. Your grandmother had it, and I have a touch of it, and I think you have it too, stronger than either of us. If the city is calling you, if you're dreaming of it, then perhaps it's time someone answered that call. Perhaps it's time someone found what lies beyond the door." "Do you think it's real?" Sophia asked. "Actually real? Not just a story or a dream?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening groves. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "I've spent my whole life working this land, Sophia. I know every rock and tree, every slope and hollow, and I can tell you this. There are places in the old grove where things feel different, where the air is cooler, where sound echoes strangely, where water runs underground in channels that don't quite make sense. I think there are caverns beneath those hills, and maybe more than caverns, maybe much more. Whether they're a city, whether they're what you're dreaming of, that I can't say. But I think there's something down there, something old and waiting. And I think, if you want to find it, I should help you try." Sophia's heart was pounding now, excitement and nervousness mixing together. "When?" "Tomorrow," Elena said decisively. "We'll take tools and clear the wall, find the door again. If it's still there, if it's real and not just an old woman's memory grown unreliable, then we'll see what we can do." "But Sophia," her voice became serious, "if we find something, if there truly is a way down, you must promise me you'll be careful. You'll take water and a light. You'll leave markers so you can find your way back. You'll not go too deep or take foolish risks. Promise me." "I promise," Sophia said solemnly. "I'll be careful, but Aunt Elena, why don't you come with me if we find a way down?" Elena smiled a little sadly. "Because I'm old, and my knees ache when I climb, and my eyes aren't what they were. But more than that, because this isn't my calling. I had my chance years ago, and I didn't take it. I chose to let the door stay closed, and I've made my peace with that choice. This is for you, if you want it. This is your adventure, if you choose to take it." That night, Sophia could barely sleep. She lay in her bed watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the ceiling, listening to the night sounds outside her window, crickets singing their endless song, an owl hooting from somewhere in the groves, the distant bark of a dog in the village. Her mind was full of marble doors and underground cities, of dreams and callings, and the strange feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. When she finally slept, she dreamed again. But this time the dream was clearer, more vivid. She walked through halls of white marble veined with gold, past fountains where water fell in crystal curtains, through gardens where flowers grew that she'd never seen in the waking world. Blooms of deepest blue and purest silver, of colours that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them. And always, that voice calling her name, drawing her deeper, guiding her towards something she couldn't yet see but knew was important, knew was meant for her. She woke before dawn, too excited to sleep anymore. She dressed quickly in her work clothes and sturdy boots. He grabbed a backpack and filled it with supplies: water bottles, a flashlight, matches, rope, a first aid kit, bread and cheese for lunch. She added a notebook and pencil, thinking she might want to document what she found, if she found anything. Downstairs, she found Aunt Elena already awake, already prepared. She'd packed her own bag with tools, a chisel and hammer, a pry bar, heavy gloves. She'd made coffee strong and sweet, and they drank it standing up, too eager to sit, barely speaking, the air between them charged with anticipation. They set out as the sun was just rising, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. They walked through the lower groves, where younger trees grew in neat rows, then climbed the terraced hillside to the highest level, where the ancient trees stood. These trees were massive, their trunks thick as barrels, their roots exposed in places where erosion had worn away the thin soil, creating fantastic shapes like frozen serpents. The wall Aunt Elena had repaired all these years ago was at the eastern edge of the grove, where the terraced land met the wild hillside beyond. It was a dry stone wall built without mortar in the traditional way, and it looked like it had been there forever. But as they examined it closely, Sophia could see the section Eleanor had described. Stones that were slightly different in colour, arranged in a slightly different pattern. They began to work, carefully removing stones and setting them aside. It was slow, careful work. The wall was old, and if they weren't careful, they could cause a collapse that would take weeks to repair. But Eleanor knew what she was doing. They knew which stones could be moved safely and which needed to stay in place. As they worked, the sun climbed higher, bringing heat. Sweat ran down Sophia's back, and her hands began to ache from the unfamiliar work of moving heavy stones. But she didn't complain, didn't slow. She could feel something building, some sense of approach, of imminent discovery. And then, after 2 hours of steady work, she saw it. A flash of white beneath the grey stones. Smooth marble, clean and bright despite having been buried for decades. Her heart leapt, and she worked faster, more carefully, clearing away the covering stones to reveal what lay beneath. The door was exactly as Aunt Elena had described it, and more beautiful than Sophia had imagined. It was carved from a single piece of white marble that seemed to glow in the morning sunlight, veined with threads of gold that caught the light and threw it back in gleams and glimmers. The door was rectangular, perhaps 2 meters high and 1 meter wide, set perfectly into the living rock of the hillside, and carved across its surface in letters that were indeed ancient, but that Sophia found she could somehow read, perhaps because of the dreams, perhaps because of some knowledge that lived in her blood, were words in ancient Greek. Beneath the trees of peace lies the city of wisdom. Enter in humility, seek in honesty, take only memory, leave only gratitude. Below the words, carved in relief, was a symbol, an olive branch intertwined with a scroll, and beneath that, a keyhole. Not a modern keyhole, but something shaped like a half moon, small and precise. "It's real," Sophia breathed. "It's actually real." Aunt Elena stood beside her. There was one hand pressed to her mouth, tears glinting in her eyes. "All these years," she whispered, "all these years I wondered if I'd imagined it, if it had been a dream or a trick of memory. But it's real. It's here." They stood in silence for a moment, just looking, just taking it in. Then Sophia noticed something else. Growing near the base of the door, in a crack in the rock where a tiny bit of soil had accumulated, was a small plant, an olive seedling, no more than a year old, with just a few leaves of silver green. And caught in its tiny branches, glinting in the sunlight, was something that made Sophia's breath catch. A key, small and golden, shaped to fit the half-moon keyhole perfectly. With trembling hands, Sophia reached down and gently freed the key from the seedling's branches. It was warm in her palm, as warm as if someone had just been holding it, and it seemed to hum very softly, vibrating with some energy she couldn't name. The seedling grew from nowhere, Eleanor said softly. Olives don't usually grow there. The soil's too poor, too rocky. And the key? That wasn't there when I found the door decades ago. I would have seen it. Which means it appeared recently, Sophia finished. It appeared when it was needed. When someone who was supposed to find it was finally ready. She looked at her aunt, the key warm in her hand, the marble door gleaming before her, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement and absolute certainty. "I'm going in," she said. Aunt Elena didn't try to stop her. She simply nodded, her face serious but not afraid. "Remember your promise. Be careful. Come back to me." "I will," Sophia promised. Then she stepped forward, fitted the golden key into the half-moon keyhole and turned it. The key moved smoothly, easily, with a soft click that seemed to echo through the hillside. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then, with a sound like a great breath being released, the marble door swung inward, revealing darkness beyond, but not complete darkness. As Sophia's eyes adjusted, she saw that there was light, a soft golden glow that seemed to come from the very walls themselves, as if the stone was somehow luminous. A breath of air came from the opening, cool and fresh and smelling of water and something else. Something green and growing that shouldn't exist underground. Sophia pulled the flashlight from her pack, though she wasn't sure she'd need it. She turned to hug Aunt Elena one more time. "If I'm not back by sunset," she said, "come looking for me. But I will be back." "I know you will," Elena said. "Go. Find what you're meant to find. Learn what you're meant to learn. And then come home and tell me everything." Sophia stepped through the doorway. The passage beyond was carved from solid rock, but carved so smoothly and precisely that it looked almost natural, as if water had worn it over millennia into this perfect corridor. The walls glowed with that soft golden light, and she could see that they were covered with carvings, words and symbols and images flowing along the stone in an endless frieze. The passage sloped downward gently, spiralling into the earth like a shell. Sophia walked slowly, one hand trailing along the wall, trying to take in everything she was seeing. The carvings told stories, and she realized stories of the city above, of olive trees planted and harvests gathered, of people living and loving and learning. And interspersed with the stories were symbols she recognized from her dreams. The olive branch and scroll, repeated over and over like a blessing or a promise. She walked for what might have been minutes or hours. Time felt strange here, stretched and fluid, as if the underground followed different rules than the world above. The passage spiraled down and down, always gently, never steep, the air always fresh and cool, the light always present though she never found its source. And then the passage opened up, and Sophia stepped out into a space so vast and beautiful that she stopped and simply stared, her breath catching in her throat. It was a city, an actual city, underground, and carved from the living rock and built with marble and stone, spread out before her in terraces that descended into a cavern so large its far walls were lost in shadow. Buildings rose on every level, houses and halls, temples and libraries, fountains and gardens. The architecture was classical, graceful, reminiscent of ancient Athens or Rome, but somehow more refined, more elegant, as if the builders had had endless time to perfect every proportion, every detail. Water flowed through the city in channels and fountains, and the sound of it filled the air with music. Gardens grew on terraces and rooftops, in courtyards and along streets, real gardens, lush and green, full of plants that seemed to thrive despite being deep underground. The light came from the walls themselves, from crystals embedded in the rock that glowed with soft radiance, providing enough light for the plants to grow, for Sophia to see everything clearly. But despite all this beauty, all this life, the city was empty, or seemed empty at first. Sophia could see no people, hear no voices other than the water's song. It was like walking through a place that had been abandoned, except that everything was perfectly maintained, perfectly clean, as if invisible hands kept the gardens tended and the fountains flowing and the marble swept. She descended into the city, walking down broad stairs carved from white stone, each step worn smooth by countless feet over countless centuries. The stairs were wide enough for 10 people to walk abreast, flanked by balustrades carved with intricate patterns, olive branches and vines, scrolls and books, symbols of wisdom and learning intertwined with symbols of life and growth. She passed between pillars that seemed to support nothing but air, yet stood as monuments to grace and proportion. Each pillar was a work of art, carved with spiraling patterns that drew the eye upward, topped with capitals so beautifully detailed they could have occupied a sculptor for months. Some were Doric in style, simple and strong. Others were Ionic, with their characteristic scrolls. Still others were Corinthian, their capitals a riot of acanthus leaves and flowers. As Sophia walked deeper into the city, she found herself in a grand boulevard that stretched away into the distance, lined on both sides with buildings of breathtaking beauty. The street itself was paved with marble tiles arranged in geometric patterns, circles and squares, spirals and stars. Each tile cut and fitted so perfectly that you could barely see the seams between them. On either side of the boulevard were courtyards, each one different, each one perfect. In one, a garden grew around a central fountain, the plants arranged in careful patterns that suggested some meaning or symbolism Sophia couldn't quite grasp. The flowers bloomed in colours she'd never seen in the world above. Deep purples that seemed almost black, blues so bright they hurt to look at, pinks that shifted to orange at their edges, whites so pure they seemed to glow. In another courtyard fruit trees grew, not olives, though these were present too, but pomegranates and figs, lemons and oranges, apricots and plums, all laden with fruit despite being deep underground. The fruit looked perfect, unblemished, always more vivid in colour than any fruit Sophia had seen in the markets. She reached out and touched a lemon, and it was cool and smooth, real and solid, undeniably alive despite the impossibility of its existence here. In a third courtyard, roses grew in profusion, climbing over trellises and archways, cascading from planters, creating walls of colour and scent. Red roses and white, yellow and pink, and some in colours that seemed to exist between colours, that shifted depending on how you looked at them. The air was thick with their perfumes, sweet and heady, almost overwhelming. And everywhere, woven through all of this beauty, was water. It flowed in channels cut into the marble streets, clear as glass, singing over smooth stones. It cascaded from fountains in every square and courtyard, the sound of it filling the air with music, sometimes a high, bright tinkling, sometimes a deep, resonant splash, sometimes a soft murmur like distant conversation. Some fountains were simple, a single jet rising from a basin. Others were elaborate, multiple levels and streams, water falling in sheets or arcing in jets, creating complex patterns of sound and light. And as Sophia walked, she began to notice something else. Books, scrolls, tablets. They were everywhere. Not random or chaotic, but carefully placed, deliberately positioned. In niches built into walls, each scroll resting in its own small alcove. On pedestals in courtyards, bronze tablets covered with text catching the light. In buildings that were clearly libraries, with shelf after shelf stretching up to ceilings so high they were lost in shadow, each shelf carefully labelled in multiple languages. She paused before one such building and climbed its steps to peer inside. The interior was vast, a hall that seemed to stretch away forever, its ceiling supported by countless pillars. Every wall was lined with shelves, and every shelf was full. The organisation was meticulous. She could see labels in Greek and Latin, in scripts she didn't recognise, in symbols and numbers that suggested some cataloguing system more sophisticated than anything she'd seen in modern libraries. Thousands of books, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. A lifetime of reading, 10 lifetimes, 100. All the knowledge of the ancient world preserved here in this impossible place, kept safe from fire and flood, from war and conquest, from the simple decay of time. Sophia felt suddenly small, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. How could one person even begin to understand what was here? How could anyone absorb even a fraction of this wisdom? She continued walking, drawn deeper into the city by curiosity and by something else. Some pull she couldn't quite name. She passed a building that appeared to be a school, with rows of benches facing a raised platform where a teacher might stand. She passed what looked like a temple, its entrance flanked by massive statues. A woman holding a spear and shield, her face serene and wise, obviously Athena. She passed workshops where tools still lay on benches, as if the craftsman had just stepped away and might return at any moment. The city was preserved in a state of perfect suspension, as if time had stopped here, as if everything was waiting. Nothing was crumbling or decayed. The marble was clean, the water flowed clear, the plants grew healthy and green. It was as if invisible hands maintained everything, as if the city itself somehow kept itself alive and perfect, waiting for the day when it would be needed again. Sophia walked for what felt like hours, trying to take in everything, knowing she was seeing only the tiniest fraction of what was here. The city stretched on and on, terrace after terrace descending into the vast cavern, each level connected by broad stairs or gentle ramps, each level packed with buildings and gardens and fountains. She saw libraries dedicated to specific subjects, one filled entirely with medical texts, another with works of mathematics, another with poetry and literature. She saw galleries where sculptures stood on pedestals, perfect forms carved from marble or cast in bronze, each one a masterpiece. She saw a hall of maps, its walls covered with representations of the ancient world, some recognizable, others showing lands and coastlines that seemed to have vanished or changed beyond recognition. And finally, in a quiet corner of the city, in a small plaza shaded by ancient olive trees that grew here underground in defiance of all natural law, she found a fountain different from all the others. It was simple, just a spring flowing from the rock into a circular basin, the water so clear you could see every detail of the basin's bottom, which was inlaid with a mosaic showing the tree of life, its roots reaching down and its branches reaching up, connecting earth and sky. Sophia cupped her hands and drank. The water was cold and pure, tasting faintly of minerals and stone, tasting of the deep earth. As she drank, she felt something shift inside her, some subtle change she couldn't quite define. It was as if a door had opened in her mind, as if her capacity for understanding had suddenly expanded, making room for all the knowledge this place contained. And then, as if her drinking from the fountain had been a signal, she heard footsteps behind her. Sophia entered one of the libraries, drawn by curiosity and by the dreams that had led her here. The interior was cool and silent except for the faint sound of water from a fountain in an interior courtyard. Shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, and each shelf was full of scrolls and codices, of tablets and manuscripts in a dozen different scripts. She pulled one down at random, a scroll written in Latin, which she could read well enough. It appeared to be a treatise on agriculture, on the cultivation of olives specifically, written with observations so detailed and precise that it must have taken a lifetime to compile. She returned it carefully and chose another, this one in Greek, a work of philosophy discussing the nature of wisdom and how it differed from mere knowledge. As she read, standing in the golden light of the library, Sophia began to understand. This city wasn't just a place. It was a repository. A library, yes, but more than that. It was a place where knowledge had been gathered and preserved, where the wisdom of ages has been collected and kept safe from the chaos and destruction of the world above. "You understand," a voice said behind her, and Sophia spun around with a gasp. An old man stood there, or perhaps not a man exactly. He was dressed in simple robes of undyed linen, and his face was lined with age beyond counting, but his eyes were bright and kind and filled with intelligence that seemed ageless. He had appeared without sound, without warning, as if he'd simply materialized from the light itself. "Who are you?" Sophia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am the keeper," the old man said, his voice soft and musical, accented in a way Sophia couldn't place, as if he spoke Italian perfectly, but had learned it very long ago, before the language had evolved into its modern form. Or rather, I am one of them. We are many and one, the guardians of this place, servants of the city and the wisdom it contains. And you are Sophia, daughter of this land, called by the dreams and drawn by the need. How do you know my name? We know all who are called, the keeper said. We have been waiting for you, though we did not know your name until you crossed the threshold. Will you walk with me? I will show you what you have come to see. Sophia nodded, unable to speak, and followed the keeper deeper into the city. He led her through streets and squares, past buildings of impossible beauty, through gardens where the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and roses. And as they walked, he spoke, telling her the story of the place. This city was built 3,000 years ago, he said, when the world above was young and uncertain. It was built by scholars and philosophers, by those who understood that knowledge was precious and fragile, that civilizations rose and fell, but wisdom should endure. They brought here the greatest works of their time, books and scrolls, tablets and manuscripts from Egypt and Greece, from Persia and India, from lands whose very names have been forgotten. They copied them carefully, preserved them perfectly, and then they sealed the city, protecting it from wars and fires, from the rise and fall of empires. They reached a great plaza at the city's heart, where a magnificent fountain sent water high into the air in arching jets that caught the light and threw rainbows across the marble. At the fountain's centre stood a statue, a woman holding an olive branch in one hand and a scroll in the other, her face serene and wise. "This is Athena," the keeper said, "goddess of wisdom, patroness of this place. The city was dedicated to her, to the principle that knowledge should be preserved and shared, that wisdom should guide human affairs. For centuries the city was open to seekers. Those who are called could find their way here, could study and learn, could add their own knowledge to our collection. But as the world above changed, as Rome fell and the Dark Ages came, the way was lost. The door was buried, the key hidden, and the city slept, waiting for a time when it might be needed again." "And now?" Sophia asked. "Why was I called? Why now?" The keeper smiled. "Because the world turns, Sophia. Because darkness and light follow each other in eternal cycle. And now we enter a time when wisdom will be needed again. You were called because you are young and open, because you have the capacity to learn and the desire to understand, because you come from the land above and can carry what you learn here back to your own time. You are called to be a bridge." They walked on, and the keeper showed her wonders that made her head spin with possibilities. He showed her a library of medicine, a vast circular hall with shelves that spiraled upward like a nautilus shell. Here were treatises on healing that had been lost to the modern world, knowledge of herbs and compounds, of surgical techniques and diagnostic methods, of the connection between mind and body, between environment and health. There were anatomical drawings of astonishing precision, showing the body's systems in detail that wouldn't be matched in the world above for centuries. There were recipes for medicines made from plants, many of which still grew in the hills above, their properties forgotten by modern medicine but remembered here. "Take this knowledge back," the keeper said softly, "not all at once, not recklessly, but carefully, thoughtfully. There are plants growing wild on your hillsides that could ease suffering, that could heal wounds that your people have forgotten how to use. Learn them again, teach them again." He showed her a library of agriculture, and here Sophia found herself most at home. The knowledge contained here was staggering. Techniques for growing food in harsh conditions, for preserving water in drought, for enriching poor soil, for working with the rhythms of nature rather than against them. There were detailed observations of crop rotations that maintained soil health, of companion planting that reduced pests naturally, of traditional methods that modern agriculture had abandoned in favour of chemicals and machinery. One section was dedicated entirely to the olive, and here Sophia spent long minutes reading, absorbing. There were descriptions of varieties she'd never heard of, some adapted to different climates or soils, with some producing fruit better for eating, others better for oil. There were pruning methods refined over millennia, techniques for grafting and propagation, wisdom about when to harvest for the best quality oil. But more than techniques, there was philosophy. These ancient writers understood that the olive tree was more than a crop. It was a partner in the landscape, a keystone species that supported entire ecosystems. Its deep roots prevented erosion, holding the soil on steep hillsides. Its canopy provided shade and habitat for countless creatures. Its fruit fed not just humans but birds and small mammals. Its fallen leaves enriched the soil. The olive grove was not a factory for producing oil but a living system, and the farmer's role was not to dominate but to steward, to guide, or to participate in the ancient dance between human and nature. "This is what your world has forgotten," the keeper said, watching Sophia read with hungry eyes. that agriculture is not about conquering nature but partnering with it, that the health of the land and the health of the people are one and the same, that true wealth is not measured in short-term profit but in sustainable abundance that can endure for generations, for centuries, forever. He showed her libraries of philosophy and mathematics, where thinkers from across the ancient world had grappled with questions that were still relevant, still urgent. What is justice? What is the good life? How should society be organized? What obligations do we have to each other, to future generations, to the earth itself? The books offered no simple answers, but they asked the right questions, framed the problems in ways that illuminated rather than obscured. In the mathematics library, Sophia found works that anticipated discoveries that wouldn't be made in the world above for centuries, concepts of zero and infinity, of probability and statistics, of geometric proofs and algebraic methods. Some of it was far beyond her current understanding, but she could see the elegance of it, the beauty of pure thought applied to understanding the patterns underlying reality. He showed her a library of astronomy, where ancient observers had tracked the movements of stars and planets with astonishing precision, had calculated the size of the Earth and the distance to the Moon, had understood that the Earth moved around the Sun centuries before Galileo would be persecuted for saying the same. Ooh, the books here were illustrated with beautiful diagrams showing the heavens in both their observed complexity and their underlying order. There was a library of engineering, filled with designs for aqueducts and bridges, for buildings that could withstand earthquakes, for machines powered by water or wind or human ingenuity. There were plans for defensive fortifications and for civilian infrastructure, for harbours and roads and public buildings. The knowledge here could rebuild civilizations, could transform cities, could solve problems that plagued the modern world. There was a library of poetry and literature, where Sophia found works she recognized, Homer and Sappho, Virgil and Ovid, alongside countless others that had been lost to time, known now only in fragments or not at all. She opened one scroll and found herself reading verses of heartbreaking beauty about love and loss, about the passage of seasons and the brevity of life, about the eternal human experiences that connected her to these long-dead poets across the gulf of millennia. And there was a library of history, where chroniclers had recorded the rise and fall of civilizations, the achievements and mistakes of empires, the lessons that each generation had to learn anew because they refused to study the past. Here were accounts of wars and plagues, of famines and migrations, of innovations and disasters, and running through it all was a thread of wisdom. That history repeated itself, not because it had to, but because people refused to learn from it, that the same mistakes were made over and over because each generation thought itself unique, exempt from the patterns that had destroyed its predecessors. This is perhaps the most important knowledge of all, the keeper said, standing in the history library with Sophia. Not the specific facts and dates, but the patterns. The understanding that human nature doesn't change, that the same impulses that drove ancient empires to overreach and collapse still drive nations today. That greed and fear and the hunger for power are constants, but so are generosity and courage and the capacity for wisdom. The question is always which impulses we choose to cultivate, individually and collectively. Sophia felt tears on her cheeks, though she wasn't sure exactly why. Perhaps it was the overwhelming beauty of it all. The staggering generosity of these ancient scholars who had worked so hard to preserve this knowledge for future generations they would never meet. Perhaps it was grief for all that had been lost above, all the libraries burned and books destroyed, all the wisdom scattered to the wind. Perhaps it was simply awe at standing in the presence of something so much larger and older than herself. "Why?" she asked the keeper. "Why did they do all this? Why did they work so hard to preserve all of this?" The keeper smiled, and his ancient face was transformed by warmth and something that looked like love. "Because they believed in the future," he said simply. "They believed that humanity was worth saving, that knowledge was worth preserving, that wisdom could triumph over ignorance if given the chance. They knew their own civilizations would fall. All civilizations fall eventually. But they hoped that something could endure, that the best of what they had learned could be passed on, could help future generations build something better. They were optimists, Sophia, in the deepest and best sense of that word. They believed in possibility." "All this knowledge," Sophia said, overwhelmed. "How could I possibly learn it all? How could anyone?" "You cannot," the keeper said gently. "No one person could. But you can learn what calls to you, what resonates with your own path. And more importantly, you can carry the knowledge that this place exists, that this wisdom is preserved. You can tell others when the time is right, so that the way can be opened again for all who seek." He led her to a small library set apart from the others, is intimate and beautiful, its walls lined with shelves of green-covered books. "This is for you," he said. "These books contain knowledge of the olive groves, not just how to grow them, but their history, their meaning, their place in the ecosystem and the culture of your land. Study here as long as you like. When you are ready to return to the surface, I will guide you back." Sophia spent the rest of the day in that library, reading by the golden light, learning things that made her see the groves above in entirely new ways. She learned about soil chemistry and mycorrhizal fungi, about traditional pruning methods that had been refined over millennia, about the olive tree's role in preventing erosion and supporting biodiversity. She learned about ancient varieties that had been lost and could perhaps be recovered, about sustainable practices that modern agriculture had forgotten. But more than facts, she absorbed a way of thinking, a philosophy. The books taught that agriculture was not about dominating nature, but partnering with it, that the health of the land and the health of the people were inseparable, that true wealth lay not in exploitation but in sustainable abundance that could endure for generations. When the light began to change, though how she knew this underground Sophia couldn't say, except that some sense told her the sun above was beginning to set, the keeper returned. "It is time," he said gently. "You promised to return before dark, and a promise should be kept." Sophia closed the book she'd been reading and stood reluctantly. "Will I be able to come back?" "Yes," the keeper said. "The door will open for you whenever you have need. And some day, when you are ready, you may choose to bring others. But for now, take what you have learned. Take the memory of this place, and take this." He handed her a small book, bound in soft green leather, its pages handwritten in beautiful script. "This is a copy of the work you are reading and a few others that might be useful. Treat it carefully, share its knowledge wisely, and remember, wisdom without action is merely philosophy, but action without wisdom is often folly. What you do with what you learn matters as much as the learning itself." Sophia took the book carefully, reverently, and placed it in her pack. "Until tomorrow night, sleep well." Then she followed the keeper and let your own heart guide you toward what memorizing you're meant to find. Every detail, knowing that even if she returned 100 times, she would never see it all, never learn all that it had to teach. At the spiral passage, the keeper stopped. "Go in peace, Sophia. Learn well, live well, and know that the city will always be here, waiting whenever wisdom is sought with an honest heart." Sophia thanked him, though her words felt inadequate to express her gratitude. Then she climbed the spiral passage, up and up, following the golden glow until she saw natural light ahead, saw the opening where the marble door stood. Aunt Elena was waiting, sitting on a stone in the evening light, and her face broke into a smile of relief and joy when she saw Sophia emerge. "You found it," she said, hugging her niece tight. "I can see it in your eyes. You found what you were looking for." "More than I was looking for," Sophia said. "So much more. Aunt Elena, there's so much to tell you, so much to show you. But first," she pulled out the green leather book. "First, I think we need to change how we run our groves. I've learned things that could make everything better, more sustainable, more beautiful. Will you help me?" Elinir took the book, opened it carefully, and her eyes widened as she read the first page. This is incredible. This knowledge. She looked up at Sophia, tears in her eyes. "Your mother would have been so proud of you. I am so proud of you." They walked home together in the last light of day, talking and planning, Sophia describing the city in detail while Elena listened in wonder. Behind them, the marble door swung closed silently, sealing itself back into the hillside, waiting patiently for the next time it would be needed. That night, Sophia slept deeply and without dreams, the sleep of someone who has completed a great task and can rest easy. And in the morning, she and Aunt Elena began to put into practice what she'd learned, slowly transforming their groves according to ancient wisdom newly discovered, making them healthier, more productive, more beautiful. The other farmers in the village noticed the changes, asked questions, learned what Sophia was willing to teach, and slowly the knowledge from the city beneath the olive groves began to spread, touching the land with wisdom, bringing abundance that honoured both the past and the future. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Sophia would return to the highest grove, would touch the wall that hid the marble door, and would smile, knowing that beneath her feet lay a treasury of wisdom waiting for all who had the courage to seek it and the humility to learn. And so our third journey ends, with ancient wisdom rediscovered and a girl who learned that the greatest treasures are not gold or jewels but knowledge shared and used for good. If this story brought you peace, subscribe for more nighttime adventures. Until tomorrow, sleep well and dream of cities filled with light and learning.